So does a flipped classroom approach really add value? So standard lessons in the past, you do a lesson and then you get homework, but flipped learning, it's homework in preparation for a lesson. So originally it was meant to be classroom-based learning using Hegarty Maths alongside it as the online educational tool. But because of COVID, that had to change. So all our research was done during the time of the pandemic. So it was online lessons rather than classroom-based lessons. So there's 4 points that we're looking at: methodology, results and discussion, conclusion and recommendations, and then looking at CFEM project in the future in relation to this. So we had a mixed methods approach, so qualitative data and quantitative data. So questionnaires, interviews, using Hegarty Maths during the lockdown period. So Hegarty Maths was really useful. It told us what the students were doing, how long they did it for, what questions they did, what they got right, what they got wrong. So a really useful tool to help us with this research. And then we did 3 assessments during the whole of the year. Now, the first assessment was done in December before lockdown. The second assessment was done just after the lockdown. So all the learning was done online for the second assessment, and the third assessment was done a few weeks later in May, where they had classroom-based learning as well. So we could look at the difference in student approaches to their first and third assessments in comparison with their second assessment. So 69 learners we had, but 55 learners were able to complete all 3 assessments. So yeah, so that was the methodology we used. Importantly, looking at the results and findings, because this was the important part of our research. So looking at the assessment data, the Hegarty Maths data, the questionnaire data, the interview data, and some of the themes that came out of the data that we used. So this first table we're looking at the 3 assessments that the students did throughout the year. Now, for me, I think the second assessment is the most important, because that was the one that we were using during the online sessions to do with flipped learning. Now, these are the average scores of the students that completed the assessments. So we had 69 learners who carried out the foundation assessment, 55 completed all 3 assessments. I compared between the male learners and the female learners, and then looking at the 2 big cohorts, the health and social care and engineering learners. And the reason for that is, when you look at the male compared to the female learners, there seems to be a bit of a gender divide, but I don't think that's the case, because when we looked at the vocational areas, it changed. So the male learners, when we included female learners, the average assessment score went up. When we included the health and social care learners, the assessment score went down. So I think that's really important, and it alters our perceptions of what we're doing the following year in terms of supporting engineering learners and health and social care learners. That was foundation learners. I looked at higher learners differently. It's a different exam. It's a harder exam. And again, this goes against the idea of a gender divide again, because I was able to get all 7 learners. I was able to break it down looking at the raw scores for each learner. So as you can see, 5 out of the 7 learners that did the higher were female. And as you can see, 3 engineers in that. And they scored generally quite high as well. So the average score was about a grade 5 standard. And this can alter the way you look at what we do in the future as well. So if you've got learners that can work at that level, in terms of working independently, we can get these learners to work more independently in terms of directed study the following year in comparison to foundation learners. When we looked at the Hegarty data, so during that lockdown period, so looking at flipped learning, so students doing their homework in preparation for the lesson, you can see the differences in the averages that the students did. So you look at the higher learners. On average, the higher learner during the 14-week period of lockdown did 830 questions in comparison to the average of the foundation 246. So you've got a different level of motivation there, which is important if you want to support students with their independent and transferable skills. Again, male and female learners, and then health and social care and engineering learners. Because I'm interested in the vocational divide rather than the gender divide, because I think that the vocational divide is more apparent. Now this table, breaking it down, looking at comparing the assessment 2 results, so the assessment they took just after lockdown, and comparing it with their Hegarty Maths usage, we were able to see some interesting results when we looked at in intervals. So students who did between 0 and 1 hour over the 14-week period, so next to nothing. Those that did between 1 and 2, those that did between 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and so on. So these are all the raw marks. So these are all individual marks for each learner. And I've highlighted certain marks because this was taken from the GCSE paper, and you needed a mark of 38 to be looking at a grade 4. So anything at 38 and over are those that would get a grade 4. And it's interesting to note that those that did less than 10 hours, only 6 out of those 43 got a result that would put them in the grade 4 bracket or higher. And those that did 10 or more hours, 6 out of 12 are in the bracket of getting a grade 4 or higher. Now, just to point out, this is assessment 2 results for foundation learners. I did higher learners separately. And it's this group here. You've got some quite motivated students in the 6 who did 6 hours to 10 hours, some quite motivated students, but they're getting low scores. And what's interesting, again, going back to this vocational divide, is that these are a lot of these are health and social care learners. So they're getting low marks, but they're not getting the grade that they need. And this links, I think, quite nicely to the questionnaire data and the interview data, and the kind of results and opinions that these students gave about their experience of working with Hegarty Maths, flipped learning, and online learning. So with the questionnaire data, we've got some mixed responses, some negative responses, and some positive responses. Now, working remotely, it was a bit of a mix. Some students like it, some students didn't. But what was interesting, again, engineering learners, including females, tended to be more confident with remote learning than health and social care learners. And of course, phones and using laptops. So that was in there, looking at access to digital technology that would support your learning. So some learners had to use their phones, which would make learning quite difficult. There were some negative responses. Most learners preferred classroom-based learning in comparison to online learning. And again, this is due to the negative impact, as a negative response, the negative impact of COVID in terms of their learning experience. But as a tool, Hegarty Maths scored quite highly. Generally regular usage, students did try and buy into the idea of using Hegarty in terms of flipped learning, and they did find the video clips that went with their learning interesting. I'm going to let you read through the negatives. So when I interviewed students, there was 5 students I interviewed. These were some of the negative comments that some students gave about their experience of working online, flipped learning, and online learning due to COVID. So too overwhelming, too interactive. So anything in quotes is the student's own language. It's not my language. Mental health issues with some of the students, internet connection. We've just had that today in the last 5 to 10 minutes. We had problems today. So you can imagine what the students must be going through. Some positives as well. So it wasn't all negative, thank goodness. So Hegarty Maths was useful as a tool. So in the absence of a teacher, students did get some value out of it. And again, something I observed myself, work with texting the tutor. So prior to the lesson, if a student was struggling with a question, they could text me and I could look online at their Hegarty Maths usage and be able to give them an answer before the lesson. So flipped learning from that point of view can actually work, especially if you buy into the idea of this kind of learning, flipped learning. Working from home much easier. So giving you a heads up in preparation for a lesson, enjoying the technique, so a different way of learning. So having to teach yourself before you come into a lesson. So it means that when you come to a lesson, you're prepared for the higher level of learning because you've already got the basics. And again, I put further points because what I found was when interviewed, your highly motivated learners, generally speaking, were taking the higher assessment, not exclusively, but higher students doing the higher assessment because they're buying into the idea of wanting a higher grade, doing GCSE and a more professional attitude. They were generally more highly motivated, which you probably saw in the data from Hegarty Maths and the assessment too. So these were the themes that came out. So access to technology, the digital divide. So pedagogical divide, so looking at students and their learning experience. Some students, even with good access, still struggled with the idea of online learning and flipped learning. It didn't suit them. And I found this particularly notable with health and social care learners, which buys into the idea of vocational divide as well. Cultural divide, I found that ESOL learners generally did better. And then, of course, the emotional stress of online learning and mental health issues. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Michelle and she's going to go through the conclusion because it links to what we intend to do in the future.
Hello again, I'm back. So we need to look at the link between functional skills maths and GCSE maths. We believe there's an opportunity for less able learners to carry out functional skills at level 2. Obviously, this would need to be addressed in terms of meeting the condition of funding, but we felt some of our health and social care learners would find that more accessible than GCSE. Based on our research, we've actually totally changed the model of delivery for next year. So we will continue with one taught session and one directed study for learners to complete the flip learning. But based on our experiences this year, the second session is going to be a timetabled session. So any learners who are not doing the flip learning or it doesn't work for them doing this independent strand will be brought into a class. So that way learners that respond well can continue doing it. Learners that don't, we've got a plan B, it's on their timetable, they will be brought in. We think that the use of digital technology is really important to education, and we think that going forward to add this digital aspect will work. So when the learners don't do flip learning as well, there will be an opportunity for them to do it remotely, not necessarily to be brought into classroom learning if it happened that the session was on their day off. So we're also going to be working with curriculum areas to improve independent and online transferable skills. So this goes into what we're doing next year. So next year, now that we've changed our model, every teacher will be delivering this flipped learning model. This year, only some of the department did, but next year, the entire department is ready to embrace it. We're also going to work with selected curriculum areas, health and social care being one of them, because we've identified them as an issue, and food being another. And the curriculum area are going to deliver the Steve Oakes GCSE Mindset programme to all their learners. And then we're going to support this in Maths and English department by referring to it constantly. So it's hoped by encouraging them to develop their mindset, we'll get them to cultivate their mathematical skills. And then we'll be able to compare the learners that have had access to this programme to those that haven't, and be able to compare to previous results. And we're looking at whether we should offer certain learners a combination of GCSE and functional skills, so they get an opportunity to work on both, but to take a functional skills in case they do not get their GCSE. So as a final note, I'd just like to say thank you to Gateshead. Excuse me. It was Gateshead College that motivated us to do this in the first place. It was Mark's passion of flip learning, and every time I met him at a forum, he was always so passionate about it. And I was a real disbeliever. I didn't think our learners would engage with this. So thank you, Mark, and the team at Gateshead for your CPD and for motivating us to do this. Any questions?